Welcome to week 47 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We start with episode 228, which originally aired June 17th, 1985. This is a very Augusta-heavy episode. As I was doing my summary, she has most of it. Augusta, who's regaining her sight, sees Lionel's photo on the mantle and turns it face down. And then she sees Lionel sneaking in with some blueprints, and Augusta says, "That rat, he's probably been living here all along." Lionel goes over those plans with a couple of men that he's hired, and he tells Frank that he's going to borrow San Simeon for the weekend. And then I remembered what happens. 35 years ago, I did see a bit of this originally while going to, I guess not going to school, working, doing some kind of job. But I remember a little bit of the date with Frank and Augusta. Augusta walks in on Julia working out and says, "Who the hell are you?" Which makes Julia immediately realize that Augusta can see, because of course she's been tricking Augusta about how much better looking she is now than when Augusta last saw her 10 years ago. So Augusta is shocked how good she looks, but says, "You'd be almost sexy if it weren't for the muscle development." She quizzes Julia about what's been going on. She immediately cops to the fact that, yes, Lionel has been living there, and says that Frank is not really an astronaut. "Don't tell me he's the mailman," says Augusta. "The milkman," says Julia. Around that same time, Jack Stanfield Lee invites himself over, and Augusta witnesses him with his hand on Julia's back, and Julia keeps slapping it away, of course, knowing that Augusta can see. But when Jack leaves the room, Augusta demands an explanation. And Julia says, "Oh, the man's a lech." And Augusta doesn't quite buy that and accuses Julia of actually seeing Jack. And Julia says that she was seeing Jack long before Augusta started seeing him. Augusta doesn't want to hear it, and the doorbell rings to save her from that conversation. And I guess to drag that conversation out to more episodes from the writer's standpoint. And Augusta opens the door and Lionel and Frank are there. And she makes it a point to let Frank in and slam the door in Lionel's face. At one point during this episode, Augusta and Warren are on the couch chatting, and Lionel is hovering over them. And Augusta takes the opportunity to ask Warren, "You wouldn't lie to me about things, would you, like your father?" Warren has to say that no, he wouldn't, so I think maybe there'll be some tension between Warren and Augusta as a result of that. Augusta has Frank over and tells him she wants to throw him a party and invite the whole town, and the press. She says, "All my friends want to meet this very famous person." And Augusta says, "I'm not attracted to just anybody. Of course, everyone's attracted to me. The gardener, the pool man, the milkman." Try that again. The gardener, the pool man, the milkman. I think Augusta's a little bit overplaying things a bit, because several, what with the scene with Warren and now mentioning the milkman, I mean, she's really giving everything away right in the first few hours, which I guess no one's picking up on, but I think she'd play it a little more closer to the vest. But
It also occurred to me during this scene that we actually haven't seen any of these friends Augusta keeps talking about throwing big parties and inviting. You think of the last big party she was going to throw and bring in the press. It turned out to be the intimate little affair with Jack Stanfield Lee.
We've actually never seen a friend of Augusta's, have we?
No.
That's interesting. Never seen a friend of Minx's. Never seen a friend of Lionel's.
No.
Cece's got a few friends, like Jack Stanfield Lee.
Yes, and of course the former, what was his name? I don't even remember what Gina's husband's name was.
Oh, yeah, Stockman DeMott.
Yes.
That's right. So, the Lockridges don't seem to have a lot of friends. We've never seen a friend of Lakin's other than Jade.
Well, and now Chrissy, I suppose. Although she seems to, she replaced Tad fairly quickly with what's his name. So, she does seem to socialize with other people. We just don't really see it.
When Frank leaves, Augusta sees Lionel still hanging around in the corner and shouts to Julia in the next room that she's going skinny dipping. And so, yeah, that was a lot of Augusta stuff in this episode, which makes sense. You've been blind for 6 weeks. You should get a lot of time in the days when your blindness ends. So I expect we'll see more of this, culminating in the anniversary date with Frank Armstead, or Armstrong, which I'll have to double check on. Maggie finally tells Ben about Warren, and of course Ben is a vegetable and doesn't react in any way. And she arranges for Ben to have 24-hour care at the hospital, and we see the same nurse we saw in the previous episode wheeling him away.
And I thought this scene must have been written from someone's past experience, because the nurse gives a long monologue about how terribly hot and uncomfortable pantyhose are in the summer heat. And I thought that one of the writers must have been a woman who had experienced this directly.
Yeah, it's still very hot in Santa Barbara, thanks to the Santa Ana winds. And, of course, now Maggie and Warren can be together. And Maggie says that they're not going to forget about Ben. We'll see how this progresses now that Ben's not an obstruction anymore to this relationship.
Now that they can forget about Ben.
They're not going to forget about Ben. He'll always be here.
Well, we've got to have the lawsuit, of course.
Well, that's right. There's the lawsuit. So, speaking of the lawsuit, Faux Jack Stanfield Lee calls Dr. Renfro and says he needs to come to Santa Barbara immediately. Kelly Capwell is becoming a problem. And he tells him about Nick and Kelly snooping in his office. And Jack has 2 buggers. A bald one and a bearded one. They are bugging Nick's apartment. I think we've seen them both before. I think they're the 2 thugs he's previously used. I think they might be the ones that tried to kill Brick, possibly. They kind of looked familiar. The bald one kind of looks like the guy from 30 Rock. So not only are they listening in on a bug, they're also intercepting the phone calls. And we also find that they can override the phone calls with a switch. So they overhear Nick saying that he plans to search Jack's filing cabinet again. And they let Jack know. And Faux Jack says he will set a trap. So Jack goes to hide in the spy shack, knowing, of course, that Nick and Kelly are going to try and sneak into his place. And when Amy's away from her desk, they sneak in and break into his office. And then Faux Jack waits for Amy to come back into the outer office and phones her and says, could you go get my briefcase from my office? So his plan is to have Amy walk in on Nick and Kelly having broken into his office. And that's exactly what happens. So they try to talk their way out of it, but as soon as Faux Jack comes back to the office, Amy tells him all about it, saying, Nick Hartley and Kelly Capwell had broken into your office. And then he says, it looks like my filing cabinet's been broken into. I guess he had made it look like it, but had some tools used against it. So now Amy's his witness for that. At home, Nick looks through the documents they stole, and it's all about imports and exports, and I think they're probably fake. But he decides to call Cruz. But the bald bugger intercepts the call and tells them that Cruz is busy, and then later calls them back and say that Cruz will meet them in the parking lot of the Capwell Hotel at Pillar A4, that he's undercover. So when they get there, I think it's the bald guy who shows up in the limo. And says, Cruz is in the limo. He's on a stakeout, so he needs to be
very dodgy.
Yeah. So both Nick and Kelly get in the limo. There's no one in the back seat, but in the front passenger seat is Dr. Renfro, who I don't think either of them know, right? Because they only really interacted with Brick and Amy.
Yeah.
And, later Jade and Christy. So Dr. Renfro, either himself or the driver, presses a button on the dashboard, and the people in the back seat are gassed. And Nick and Kelly lose consciousness.
I assume they called a doctor because he would know something about,
anesthesia.
yeah, what kind of gas.
Administered in a very unorthodox way.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. So I think Nick and Kelly's story is ramping up. They may end up in that cave with the real Jack Stanfield Lehi.
Maybe. And maybe that, we don't know where that cave is.
Yeah,
Maybe it's
I assume it's in New Salem, but...
Yeah.
No, it must be in New Salem, because we saw the torture hanging out with
That's right.
the lady and the king. And then, of course, June something is the anniversary. So that should be, I assume, happening sometime this week, or maybe next Monday, 21st, I think. 20th or 21st, I think. Lionel had said. And Ben and Maggie or Warren and Maggie will progress, and didn't see Christy or Ted this week.
And we haven't seen Mason for quite some time now.
That's true.
Several episodes at least.
And I know on the Santa Barbara Facebook group, someone made a complaint that after bringing Santana back, she spends many days not on screen, and we actually haven't seen her for a little while. Not since I think Gina got out of the hospital. I think was probably around the last time we saw her at the murder, I guess. So, so we'll see what storyline they actually have planned for Santana.
Yeah, whether it'll be Brandon related or perhaps something else.
I mean, with Gina in the rehab.
And not getting any better.
Yeah, I'm thinking Santana might make a push to have something with Brandon, but it's not like she's going to start up with Cece again, because Sophia's right there if he wants to start
Who we
up
also
with
haven't seen for a while.
So. Well, maybe it's maybe they took the opportunity to give a bunch of people vacation time and switch gears on some stories. So, anyway, we'll be back after we've seen the episode 229, the Tuesday episode. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
I mean, you'd be almost sexy if it weren't for the muscle development.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 229 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Tuesday, June 18th, 1985. Before we saw this episode, we saw an episode of Police Story that had A. Martinez on it as one of the two main cops. It's an anthology series, so they showcase a different pair of cops every week. And Jack Carter was in that episode too, who we haven't seen yet on Santa Barbara, but will be showing up, I think, later in this year.
And that would have been, of course, probably, I guess, about 8 years maybe before Santa Barbara. So it's...
I think this is 71 or something.
Yeah.
So it's like 14 years.
Very 70s, very tan suits and bell-bottom pants and a lot of polyester kind of thing. But
big cars.
Yeah.
Julia reveals to Jack that Augusta could see him that whole time, and that she hates him now. Jack says, well, you wanted proof that you're the only woman for me. So I'm not sure how he translated that into proof, but Jack meets Mason at the Orient Express and wants to delay the case by 2 weeks because he's got to go out of town. So we may see Jack in New Salem, I'm thinking. And then Julia arrives for her lunch with Mason, and they assured Jack they've only met once before for lunch, but Jack seems to be a bit jealous of Mason. And then when he leaves, Mason asks Julia, you're not still in love with him, are you? And she says that she's seeing him again later tonight. And they talk about how far she'll go with Jack, get the information, and Julia says, you think I'd go that far? And Mason says, I think you'd love to go that far. And Julia says, not with you. Later, at, I guess, his place, Jack pounces on Julia, and she says, aren't you just a little too anxious to get me in the sack? And Faux Jack says, I've had you in the sack, I want you on the floor. He decides that Julia has been stringing him along too much, so he starts to put on his jacket and says that he'll go to Augusta instead, which prompts Julia to throw another vase at him, which misses. And Faux Jack says, your aim is just as bad as the last time. Julia says, I hit you the last time. Bojack says, but you didn't do much damage. Julia says, a gash requiring 14 stitches is not much damage. So, Bojack fingers his shoulder as Julia leaves. I guess he realizes the real Jack has slipped something in on him. So, Julia starts to wonder. She has her flashbacks about throwing that vase at Jack, the real Jack. And she tells Augusta she thinks something's wrong with Jack and that she's going to keep seeing him with her eyes open.
So I'm predicting we'll maybe see a scene in the not too distant future of faux Jack getting a gash put on his shoulder or something like that. Probably some more torture scenes of the real one to get the information out.
Yeah. Now I think now he's going to suspect Julia too when she tries to hang out with him and get his shirt off. So yeah, maybe we'll get a fake scar put on just so that he can reveal it when he takes his shirt off.
Yeah.
And then it'll be another one of those, I was just kidding, I knew you. But we'll see. We'll see who figures it out first. I assume it will be Julia who figures it out at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless someone actually runs into the real Jack at some point. That could be another way this gets revealed.
Right, well, I assume he's in Europe somewhere, so have to be someone would have to get invited there. Perhaps the King of New Staland is a friend of Cece's. Eden and Sophia wonder where Kelly could be. They are at the Orient Express waiting to have lunch with her. They go home and Eden goes to find Kelly's friend's book, where she'll find, I think, Sally and Dr. Tony. That's about it. Sophia thinks Kelly's just gone out sailing. Mason comes down the stairs at the Capwell mansion and Cece says, Mason, what are you doing here? He says he was just reading Brandon a story. And Cece mentions that Gina was quiet when he saw her, and Mason says that she was violent when he saw her. And Mason suggests moving Gina to another facility. Cece tells Sophia that Jack told him that the DA won't be able to get very far with his case against her. So that case is moving along quite slowly. Yeah, I guess normally the courts don't operate immediately too, so I guess that's normal.
That part's probably quite realistic.
Christy and Ted get paid. And Christy mentions that her money's mostly spoken for. And she goes to the pawn shop and retrieves the candlesticks of the Lockridges that she had pawned. And Augusta spots her returning them to the shelf, or to the desk. She does not reveal, of course, that she can see, and she says, I want you to tell me the truth, Christy. Is there another presence in this house? And Christy says, none of us have seen it. So she's covering for Lionel as well.
Yeah.
Which Augusta's not too happy with. Lakin arrives, having bought a cassette of the new Madonna album, which I don't know which album that would have been, and mentions Christy's paycheck, and she says that Ted had told her about it. Augusta is surprised that she's back to talking with Ted, because the last she knew they were splits. Lincoln wants Lionel to tell Augusta, I guess, that he's been living there. And Lionel says she'd marry Frank out of spite. Augusta then later is watering flowers and chatting with with Lincoln, and she spots Lionel near the window. So she puts some ice in the watering can and mentions that Frank may pop the question on Friday. And as she pretends to water the plants outdoors, she ends up aiming the freezing cold watering can at Lionel's pants. Later, Augusta tells Julia that she thought it was only Julia who was in on it with Lionel, and then realizes that everybody knew.
Yeah.
She said she was ready to kill Warren, but found out that Lakin knew. Now she's considering retroactive birth control. So I think Friday is going to be the big day of the big date. So probably Friday and Monday will be a fun day for Augusta, Lionel, and Frank.
That'll be fun.
Christy shows up at the Capwell mansion because she and Ted had talked about going to a movie that night. And he kind of said, oh, it wasn't really a fixed plan. I'm going to, with Lakin, we're going to have dinner at the Express. So we now got a nickname already for the Orient Express. At least with the younger set. Christy runs off, and Ted kind of goes after her, but she's vanished. So Christy goes to the Orient Express and asks the head waiter if he could give her an extra shift. She says, I don't want overtime or anything, I just need the money. But really, she just wants to be Ted and Lakin's waitress. So Lakin has her arms around Ted, and they're actually quite cozy. And Christy walks up, and she makes an in-joke that they have in the kitchen about a cosmic telephone, and Lakin pulls her arm off Ted and starts to look annoyed right away. So I think she's a bit jealous of Ted and Christy working together.
Yeah, I think we are seeing the beginnings, perhaps, of a little love triangle story.
So Ted sends Christy away, and then Ted and Lakin kiss. So we will see how far that goes before something else happens. Faux Jack confirms to the man in charge that Nick and Kelly are being taken care of. Nick and Kelly are transferred to the trunk of the car after being knocked out and driven to another location, but partway through, due to an incoming storm, they have to stay overnight at an abandoned hotel. So they get tied up together in a room, and Nick tells Kelly that Cruz probably didn't even get their call, but Kelly says that Eden's waiting for her to meet them for lunch. So Renfro's listening at the door, and he's happy to confirm that nobody knows exactly what Kelly and Nick have been up to.
Yeah.
He says, we're not pulling a job, boys. We're shaping the future. So this new Stalin thing is probably quite important. Unless he's talking about his experiments as well, because he actually gets permission from Faux Jack to do psychological experiments on Kelly and Nick.
Yeah.
The bald thug makes sexual advances on Kelly every time he checks her knots, and Nick comes up with a plan. So he pretends to be asleep, and when the bald guy comes in, Kelly tries to seduce him, and she seems to revert to her Texas accent when she does that. Nick pretends to wake up when the guy goes over there to probably punch him. It's revealed that Kelly is actually untied, and she grabs a plank from behind and is about to whack him. But Dr. Renfro walks in right at the last second. So he ends up separating Kelly and Nick into different rooms, and he starts off with his experiments. He says to Nick that if the ransom isn't paid by 10 o'clock, Kelly will die, and then he puts a little alarm clock next to Nick. Now, we all know there's not really a ransom, but they had assumed they were kidnapped for a ransom. So Nick is like psychologically tortured as he watches the clock approach 10. At 10 o'clock, Nick hears a gunshot. Now, back at Faux Jack's place, he says that he's going to get Jack to admit that he's the real genius of the family. So that's whatever this big, far-reaching plan is. I mean, Faux Jack seems to think it's going to have been high standing with Jack, and Renfro thinks they're shaping the future. So,
and I feel like maybe Dr. Renfrew's character has maybe changed a little bit, or we've expanded on a little bit, because it seems to me after the whole episode with Amy's baby, I think he said something like, oh, can I now get back to my practice? So it sounded like they were sort of holding something over him.
Yeah, he was anxious to wrap it up with this group.
Yeah, whereas now he's kind of taken on this mad scientist mode, and it seems like he's even more of a villain than the Faux Jack Stanfield. In fact, Faux Jack actually sort of says at one point, like, oh, I'm going to be so glad when I don't have to work with that guy anymore. So it seems like they've kind of adjusted the characters a little bit.
Well, when I first had the idea to do Kelly Capwell's Psycho Gazebo as a recurring thing, I actually thought, oh, we'll have Dr. Renfro in there. And then when Dr. Renfro came on, I'm like, wait a minute, why is he hanging out with Kelly, or with Joe and Amy? And he doesn't really seem to be a psycho. So I thought, why did I have in my idea that Dr. Renfro was a psycho villain who was threatening Kelly? But now finally we see why I had that in my head.
Yeah.
Because that is what he suddenly has become.
Yeah.
So yes, he will be joining the Psycho Gazebo at some point. When I probably will do it around the time he leaves the show, just so I can put in more clips that are not spoilery. That gazebo full of psychos that have tried to kill Kelly is building up quite large in only the first year.
And I think we're also maybe seeing the beginnings of maybe a bit of unraveling of Nick's character, because we already know he's very psychologically damaged from his time in Vietnam. We've heard a lot of renditions of Bad Moon Rising and telling his story. And I think that these psychological experiments that Renfrew is doing, which right now seem to be targeting mainly him, are going to have a longer-term effect.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. We'll see what happens to Nick, both while in custody and if they get out of it at some point. And yeah, they actually used the psycho music that they'd used previously for, I don't know if it was Ginger, when she was preparing her needle for Kelly, but they actually used that for Dr. Renfro when he sort of did his twist and turn. So, yeah, we will see what happens at the abandoned hotel with Kelly and Nick. While there's a storm, we could hear the thunder actually outside in one scene. So it's a stormy night, and they're in an abandoned hotel. What could go wrong? We will see when we watch episode 230 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Santa Barbara Bus Depot, paging Elizabeth Peale.
Elizabeth Peale arrived in Santa Barbara from England to authenticate the art treasures being brought up from the Amanda Lockridge. Museum board member C.C. Capwell wanted to make certain that his archenemy Lionel Lockridge didn't try to pull a fast one on him and the other members of Santa Barbara's art community. But, unknown to everyone, Elizabeth Peale was actually working with Lionel Lockridge, faking numerous paintings by old masters, and an entry into the ship's log that would damn the Capwell family. Ingratiating herself into the Capwell household, Elizabeth took on the task of refreshing Cece's art collection. Little did Cece know that most of his artwork, and that hanging in the Lockridge mansion, had been faked years earlier by Elizabeth Peale. A jealous Gina DeMott made certain that Elizabeth's interest in Cece went no further than his paintings. Elizabeth then took a fancy to the Lockridge chauffeur, Brick Wallace, but it soon became clear that he only had eyes for Amy Perkins. Although her relationship with Lionel appears to have been both professional and personal, Elizabeth began to develop a romantic interest for Lionel's son, Warren. Once again, Elizabeth lost out to another woman, as Warren had set his sights on Maggie Gillis. Quickly rejecting Marcello and Mason as potential prospects, Elizabeth decided to cut her losses and leave town. She made one final stop to let Amy Perkins know that she had misunderstood Brick's interest in her, and went off, suitcase in hand. During most of her stay in Santa Barbara, the Carnation Killer was systematically killing off the city's unnecessary blondes. It was thus a shock when Elizabeth Peale managed to get out of town, without running into Peter Flint on the final day of his killing spree. Whether Elizabeth went back to England, or is merrily redecorating Warren's barn in the hopes that one day he will return, we do not know. We do know, however, that Elizabeth Peale is one of the few people who have successfully left Santa Barbara rather than ending up in the Santa Barbara Cemetery.
Goodbye, Mason.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 230, which originally aired Wednesday, June 19th, 1985. And we saw Jed Allen on Adam 12 the other night.
Woohoo!
He got killed. He was kind of a bad guy in this one. The Capwells have been out looking for Kelly. And the local news broadcast that Kelly is missing. Amy sees the broadcast and phones Cruz to tell him that she saw Amy last night.
Mm-hmm.
And Cruz questions foe Jack Stanfield Lee. And he says that Nick came in last night and he was crazed and he was calling him a capitalist pig. So I think foe Jack is really playing up the potential that his Vietnam experiences have made Nick snap.
Mm-hmm.
Cece suspects that Nick is involved, so as we long suspected, I think, Cece doesn't like Nick at all. Doesn't like him anywhere near Kelly. He's as bad as Joe Perkins.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. At one point, Cece is sort of bemoaning the fact that Kelly is not a very good judge of character, but as we know, I mean, Cece's married to Gina. He was the one who very happily let Peter into Kelly's life, and he never did see the good in Joe, who was obviously a much better person, so...
And he's got fake Jack Stanfield Lee with his hands in half of the Capwell business right
Yes,
now.
that's right.
And possibly potential date for Eden in the future. So, Cece questions Cruz about how well he knows Nick Hartley. And foe Jack comes over and tells the Capwells that Nick and Kelly broke into his office last night. He says he filed a police report and kept Kelly's name out of it. So it looks bad for Nick. He says, who knows how he'll react if she rejects him. So he's putting the bee in everyone's head that he's obsessed with Kelly. His charm escapes me completely. And Cece says, and me. I'm starting to think he has something to do with her disappearance, and Lord help me if he has. Eden also jumps on the anti-Nick bandwagon, too, very easily. Maybe because he's a friend of Cruz's. But Cruz and Eden go to search Nick's place, and, they look at his photos, and Eden's a little concerned at all the photos of Kelly he's got. She feels it's an obsessive amount of photos of Kelly. And then she finds a piece of Kelly's blouse, which... I don't recall if that's related to something that happened before, or if that maybe was planted there by Jack's people.
Mm-hmm.
Ted climbs in Lakin's window, just as he did all those months ago, but this time he finds Christy in Lakin's bedroom. And he mentions that his sister is missing, and Christy, for the first time, mentions that she has a sister. Who stays away from the family.
So I wonder if we'll see that sister at some point down the road, perhaps.
I should think so. We've got a mom and a sister now, for sure, that we know about. And at the Capwell Hotel, Christy runs into her Aunt Laura, who a character I didn't remember at all. So I don't know if we'll see her again, or if she's just, I only saw it on certain days of the week, and maybe if I just heard her on audio, she wasn't that memorable. But Aunt Laura wants Christy to come home, and she promises that her mother has stopped drinking. So we now confirm that drinking is the problem there. Christy tells her aunt that she's found a better family in Santa Barbara and sends her off. And when I guess it's Ted asks who that was, he says, oh, it's just someone collecting for charity.
Yeah.
So it doesn't want to have anything to do with her own family. Back at the Capwell house, Santana comes over to watch Brandon, with Gina being locked up and all the, hype over Kelly being missing. Christy also comes over and meets Santana, and assumes at first she's the maid, and then finds out that she's the maid's daughter and grew up in the big house. And Christy really is impressed by that, says she wishes she'd grown up in a house like this.
Yeah.
She looks around the atrium and, looks at different objects dart. And Ted sees her looking around, and Christy says it's twice as nice as the Lockridge's house. She probably is.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely gotten the sense that it's bigger, too, I think, just from the exterior shots and the size of the living room and so forth.
And I think from Minx's early on scenes, in the early days, it seems like that family's a little less ostentatious than the Capwells would be with their money. Christy talks about how great it is to have money, and Ted says that rich people are unhappy too. And Christy says, but rich people can afford to be unhappy. Out in the wilderness, Nick escapes from his captors and hides out in the barn of a Vietnamese couple.
Yeah.
They allow him to stay for one night, and they cover for him when Renfro's henchmen come bursting in with guns and even pretending to be police officers, but they don't crack or let on that Nick is hiding in the barn. But it turns out that they don't really buy it, because they come by later after the farmer and his wife have left the barn, and they come in and they say, all right, Hartley, come out. We know you're in here. But Nick has had, I think, an axe handle or an oar or something with him the whole time when he's been sleeping in the back. So he has that, and he manages to whack one of them at least with it and get out of the barn. They go chasing him through the, I want to say some wilderness, because they're shooting at him, but he ends up near a well, so that may be back near the same farm again. And Nick decides if he climbs down the well, they won't be able to find him. So he lowers the bucket down and then wants to slide down the rope, but unfortunately his weight is too much, and the rope actually comes loose from its staples or whatever on the axle. And Nick falls all the way to the bottom of the well. The thugs realize he's in there, and they're talking about whether they should go down and check and see if he's alive. But the one says, I'm pretty sure I hit him, and if he's wounded and down there, he won't survive. So we then see that Nick regains consciousness just in time to overhear them say he never would have run away if he knew Kelly was still alive. So that'll give Nick some incentive to get out of that well somehow. I can't imagine how you'd get out of that well, especially if you were injured. Hopefully it's on the property of that farm couple, and they can lower down a rope if they find him. So.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where this goes from here. I think we're already seeing shades of the sort of original story of Joe and Kelly, where Kelly falls in love with someone beneath her station and, becomes perhaps his only protector or benefactor if it shakes out.
Yes. I think we haven't seen Kelly in a couple days. I don't know if she's got some time off, but eventually Nick and Kelly will meet up again. I assume if he knows she's alive, he'll try and go back to that abandoned motel and try and find her there.
I was wondering if perhaps they might take her to wherever the real Jack is being kept.
That's a possibility.
Because they haven't really said what they're going to do with her. Faux Jack seems to have basically just given Nick over to the doctor for his experiments, but we really don't know quite what they have in mind for Kelly.
Well, really, for this to be, the whole point of this is to put Kelly and Nick together, so they can't really be apart for too much of this. They've got to be locked in a dungeon for a while or something. Something where they can bond. So.
And then unite against their captors and perhaps Kelly's family as well.
Yeah, and I'm still thinking maybe somehow Rick and Amy will get involved in the storyline.
Yes.
From them. They're the only real other people who potentially know of
Well, and
Bojack.
Julia.
Well, Julia too, yeah. But she's so far off from Kelly and Nick that I don't think she could be of help really for that. And that's about it for a Wednesday show. Everything just steamed along, and of course Friday we've got the Augusta and Lionel's anniversary coming up, so that'll be
fun.
fun. And I assume tomorrow we'll see Nick get out of a well somehow. And maybe we'll meet more of Christy's family. We will see you again in a few seconds after we watched episode 231 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Cyrano de Lockridge.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 231 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, June 20th, 1985. So we're still in June, so we're not really in the summer holidays yet. So I think the Lake and Ted Christie storyline will really accelerate come July, because kids are still really in school right now doing finals. They weren't actually in this episode. Faux Jack has gone over to the Capwells to tell them that it's clear Nick Hartley is one of those tragic Vietnam vets we hear about. A time bomb ready to go off. Eden is angry with Cruz for still standing by Nick. And Eden tells Cece and Mason and Sophia about all the photos they found of Kelly at Nick's place. And then Sophia says if Nick is anything like Peter Flint. So this is for Nick's sake, hopefully he and Kelly will come out of this together instead of Nick being found first and then assumed.
It'll be Joe Perkins all over again.
Even afterward, I think Cece will still hate Nick. He's already saved Kelly once and still doesn't like him. So.
Well, there's a certain class element to it, I think.
I don't know if anyone will ever be right for Kelly in Cece's eyes.
Well, Peter was, because Peter could fake being a higher class than he really was.
Maybe he'll try and set her up with Jack Stanfield Lee when they get out of this mess. The lab calls to confirm the fabric they found at Nick's place is from Kelly's blouse, because it was covered with her perfume. Cruz tries to talk Cece out of calling the FBI at this point. And then later says to Eden that he's got just as many contacts as Jack in the FBI. So I think he's seeing Jack as a rival for Eden.
Yeah, that's possible. I think he's probably irritated by the amount of attention Jack Stanfield Lee, or the apparent Jack Stanfield Lee, is sort of commanding from all sides.
Mason tells Santana that Gina will likely be coming home soon. And Santana gets really worked up at the thought of that. And Cece is not happy at all with her outburst. He tells her that she's there as a servant. To serve and be silent. So this is more of Cece's attempt to shut Santana basically out of Brandon's life, which I think is going to boil over at some point if he keeps doing that, especially with Gina being an unfit mother in her current state. Cece, because he's quite busy with this Kelly thing, asks Mason to go see Gina.
So I think it's kind of interesting. We've seen this throughout the course of the show, that he has a really interesting relationship with Mason, and that they kind of hate each other, but he often calls upon Mason to help look after Brandon or check on whoever. So there are these weird times when they're kind of allies as well.
And with Mason's, friendship with Gina, he's really siding with Gina against Santana on the Brandon front. And someone actually says, so it's shocking to see Cece and Mason agreeing with each other.
Yeah, and I often kind of have wondered, noticing that dynamic, if it would play out quite the same with the original actress who played Santana, because she had a sort of sultry quality to her that I think maybe created a slightly different tone with Mason.
The new one's a little more mouse-like, I would say.
Yeah, I actually find her a bit more shrill myself. But yeah, she's a very different kind of energy.
Nick climbs out of the well, buoyed by the knowledge that Kelly's alive, and uses the farmer's phone, but they inform him that quite often after storms the outbound communications are staticky, that they can hear incoming sound, but that the other end can't really hear them, and he finds that out when he calls the Capwells, and although he's trying to tell them what's going on, he hears Cece's end of the conversation, and it's very accusatory. The call actually convinces Cece even more that Nick has kidnapped Kelly and that he's asking for a ransom. So Nick leaves a subsequent message on Cruz's answering machine, and it's just as choppy, and convinces Eden and Cece just as much that he's demanding a ransom. But the machine does mention the location of Lone Pine. So, I think the obvious thing is, like, why would the kidnappers reveal they've got Kelly at Lone Pine? It doesn't make sense that he would be the kidnapper and be giving them the information. But
unless I assume they were interpreting that as like a drop-off spot or something like that, maybe?
Oh, that could be. So Cruz prepares to go there and even demands to go with them, and eventually he decides it's easier just to let her come with him than to risk her following. So Nick remembers from when he was down in the well and overheard the henchmen that they were talking about a silo. And at first the farmers say, well, there are thousands of silos around here. Every farm's got one. But then I think it's the farmer's wife who recalls an abandoned nuclear silo. Nick says, yeah, that's just the sort of place it would be, which does make sense. So Nick heads out on a borrowed motorcycle with a hand-drawn map and a basket full of lunch prepared by the wife, and sets out to find the silo and hopefully Kelly.
And I thought this was, to me, kind of maybe an interesting difference in, I think, how Nick and Joe, or especially the first Joe, might have handled this situation, because Nick, maybe this is his training from Vietnam kicking in too. He's actually pretty matter-of-fact about it. He says, oh, Cece has misinterpreted what I said, so I'm not going to get help there. Mm-hmm. And then when he phones Cruz, he says, oh, he's not getting the message either. I'm on my own. Okay, I got to take care of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think Joe, especially as I say the first iteration, because I think Dane Witherspoon had a more sensitive kind of interpretation of the character. I think he would have been still holding on to hope a little bit more. Maybe have, I'm not sure he would have taken, I just can't see that character taking as practical approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm wondering about this silo, if this is really just a convenient location that's near this abandoned motel, or if that's really, the destination, and if so, does the plan have something to do with nuclear missiles, or is it just that happens to be an abandoned location they're using? So I'm intrigued, because I don't remember this storyline at all. So it'll be interesting to see if the nefarious scheme has something to do with nuclear missiles.
Yeah.
Jack, because of the storm, I guess, is having trouble getting a flight out of Santa Barbara.
We have experience with that firsthand.
He had already told Renfro on the phone that he has a helicopter waiting for him on the other side to take him to the silo, but he just calls, I guess, his private pilot and tells him, I'll be there. You better be ready to take off. So Julia arrives and wants to have one of her conflicts with Jack, I guess, but Faux Jack says, oh, I'm going out of time. I don't have time for your nonsense. So he heads out.
And Julia seems to find perhaps that a little suspicious too, because it sounds like she and the original Jack had a little bit more of a rapport in that way, that they would perhaps have a bit more of a playful relationship. And the Faux Jack is not having any of that at this point.
At La Puerta, Santana comes to visit Gina. Gina's kind of coming out of a stupor when she spots Santana, and instead of taking Santana's offer of, don't you want to hear about Brandon, in a good spirit. She slaps Santana, which Mason just walks in just after, and later Gina tells her kooky friend, who's her drug supplier, that she needs to get out of here. And her friend says, oh, that's easy to do. I just need a lot of money. So I suspect Gina may be on the run for a while. Maybe she'll find Warren's barn to sleep in.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how she pays off her drug dealer / friend.
Right, she's going to have to borrow money from someone. Maybe she'll call Ted for a loan.
Yeah,
Something
how
like
much
that.
money does Ted really have? Because he's already supporting Mason, as far
That's
as we
true.
know.
That's true. Mason's really probably quite poor. Who else could Gina call that she would trust? She doesn't really have a lot of friends.
No, unless she
Maybe
does
Warren?
something nefarious to try and break into Stockman's money, I guess, that CC is holding for her. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Mason tells CC that he talked with Gina for over an hour and she was incoherent most of the time. So he finally agrees to. CC finally agrees with Mason that Gina should maybe be moved somewhere else because she's not getting any better. So I suspect they'll be just a second too late.
Now, is Gina not still pregnant, or have we kind of dropped that storyline?
Oh, that's true. She is.
I mean, she doesn't look it.
No. But, maybe it hasn't really been that long. I don't know how long ago that stuff was, I think.
Maybe it'll be like, what's that series we used to watch, Macmillan and Wife, where she was always pregnant, almost every episode, and they never seemed to have a baby, and then he didn't have a wife.
Well, hopefully Gina will fare better than Sally Macmillan. Augusta tells Julia that she's going to make Lionel's life miserable for the next few days. Later on the couch with Frank, Augusta tells him she wants someone less literary, because Lionel was so literary. Because Frank is trying desperately to read all of these quotations off the cue cards Lionel has for him. Or Frank, did I say Lionel? Frank is trying desperately to read all the cue cards Lionel is showing him with all these literary quotes and references on them. Then Augusta spots that Lionel has written, "Tell her I love you," on the card, and Augusta's horrified, and just as Frank is about to say that, Augusta sticks her hand in his mouth. Augusta says, "It's a mistake to say things too soon. Save it for our date." Then she says, "I can say all the things I've wanted to say then, too, because I have some depths of emotion longing to be plumbed." Frank says, "Well, I hope I can be the plumber." Lionel then shows Frank the soundstage where he is having San Simeon built for the big date.
Now, I wonder which bit of San Simeon they're recreating, because we've been to San Simeon. It's quite a large estate.
Lionel said they are making 3 rooms. So I assume some sort of a dining room, some sort of a bedroom, and maybe a living room or a sitting room.
Now, as I recall, that was actually a surprisingly small bedroom. It was built
Let's
from a
see if it
medieval
looks familiar
chapel.
when we see
Yeah.
it, I guess. I mean, I assume they've got builders. They've got the only bit they let us see in this episode was a part of a window that they looked through, where there were people rushing all around building things. And Lionel says, "Oh, these are the best people." He's got all the best people working on his faux San Simeon, and he says there'll be a few windows in the set so he can watch what's going on. So don't try anything, Frank. And that he's got projectors set up, so he'll be projecting Frank's words on all the windows and ceilings so that Frank can speak the right things to Augusta from wherever he is located.
You know, I think what San Simeon is best known for is that elaborate pool.
I don't think that'll be involved in this.
But it just seems to me that if you don't have that, then how would you really know?
Well, all you
you're
need
in
is the
San
sound effect of the pool. And that leads me to the person that Lionel introduces Frank to, the best sound guy in the business, whose name I've forgotten at the moment. But he He used to be a big sound man in radio. There it is, Harvey Mellencamp. Harvey Mellencamp has a hearing aid and can basically not understand anything Lionel is saying to him. But Lionel seems to not be too worried about the sound man not being able to hear. And I can just... all I'm picturing is some inappropriate sound effects being played during the date, because this clearly is going to be played for comedy, this whole perfect day, especially with Augusta being able to see and knowing exactly what's going on. So
He was able to get the mattresses from Zimmerman's, though, so those should work.
That's right, yes. So there definitely will be a bedroom. He says the bed's being delivered by Zimmerman's. So I think he's going to try and get Frank to get Augusta in bed and then swap out with him at the last minute, as he had tried previously. So I don't know. It seems kind of dodgy, too. I don't think Augusta would be too happy with that if she...
Do you remember how much work it was for us to move that mattress? Can you imagine doing that just for a night's stunt?
Well, he's, not lifting it himself.
No, that's true. Lionel would be paying for all that.
So the next episode is Friday. So even though Augusta said she was going to make the next few days miserable for Lionel, I don't think we have to wait that long. I think it's going to be this next episode that we see the anniversary date on.
You would know, you've got the list. I was assuming the cliffhanger would be related to Kelly and Nick's situation rather than Lionel and Augustus. But
yeah, for the cliffhanger, I suspect it would be a Nick thing. He'll probably be chased. Well, he's on a motorcycle, so... Julia had actually told Augusta that Lionel's plan was to restore her confidence. So she's, kind of decided that maybe Lionel's plan wasn't all that bad, but Augusta's not too happy with it. And she says, I'm not going to be my own person and not part of Lionel's.
yeah, it does make things quite amusing that Augusta can see everything.
Mm-hmm.
And really, no one knows except Julia. So, yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun to see how all the different characters play their parts in that little charade.
Mm-hmm. We'll see after we watch episode 232 of Santa Barbara. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Because you see, I too have some depths of emotion that haven't been plumbed.
Oh, well, I certainly hope I can be the plumber.
What are you two saving it for anyway? Your 30th birthdays?
Welcome back!
Hello.
We finished episode 232, originally aired Friday, June 21st, 1985. Brick tells Amy that the morgue attendant who kidnapped her baby is no longer employed by the hospital. That's a long time ago. That was clearly a fake morgue attendant when we first saw him months and months ago. And that story is inching excruciatingly slowly forward, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But more interesting news is Amy tells Brick that Nick might have kidnapped Kelly after they both broke into Jack's office last night. And Brick immediately thinks Nick's probably onto something. Which is great, because, we were kind of hoping that this Nick and Brick storyline would merge a little bit, and they could both battle foe Jack Stanfield Lee.
The Adventures of Nick and Brick.
I wonder if Brick will find out that Nick is at Lone Pine, at the southern end of the Sierras, and zip up there to help, or find Nick, or find Kelly. Brick breaks into Jack's filing cabinet, and the first thing he finds is a piece of paper with Dr. Renfro's name on it. So, be interesting to see where Brick goes with this. Lionel shows Frank around the soundstage, and we have a very sparse San Simeon, which I kind of remember from the bit of this episode that I must have seen when I, raced home from work, I guess, to see the last few minutes. But yeah, there's a window here and a curtain there, and some projectors on which Lionel will place his script. So they're really just two projectors, and they're like overhead projectors.
Yeah.
So Frank goes to pick up Augusta, and Lionel's dressed in a chauffeur outfit. And they bring Augusta to the soundstage, and Frank tells her he's going to fly her to San Simeon. Of course, Augusta can see they're just in the soundstage, and she's bemused when he takes her up a small flight of steps into some cockpit chairs that have been bolted to a plank and are sitting, as it turns out, on a forklift. Because when Frank says, "Hold on to your hat, Gussie," the forklift lifts them up as if they're taking off. And Louise Sorel's face has some great expressions throughout this whole episode as she's bemused by the whole scene.
There's actually some great acting here, certainly on the part of Louise Sorel, but also on the part of Augusta, I would say.
Good point. Now, to my surprise, Lakin shows up to watch. So she and Lionel are standing by, watching a lot of this craziness happen. Frank shows Augusta around San Simeon, the, one door out to the terrace and the one curtain in front of the bed. And Harvey's hearing aid gives out, and he ends up cranking up the bird noises to the extent that Augusta has to plug her ears. Then a train whistle sounds, and all Frank can say is, "I sure hope there aren't any more trains coming by."
And for those of you who haven't been, San Simeon's basically on top of a mountain. So.
And then Augusta says, "Why don't we just wave to the passengers?" She's kind of going with the flow, I guess, on the crazy train. Frank throws another log onto the fire, and the heat immediately comes up, and Augusta's like, "Oh, okay, it's warm now." Frank returns with some champagne, and Augusta says, "I want to keep my wits about me in case you decide to pop something else. The big question." So they kiss instead of having champagne. Lionel motions for them to move to the bedroom for the next phase of the plan, which we're still not quite sure about, but we suspect it involves Lionel switching places with Frank, and at this point he tells Lakin she's got to get off the train at this point. So there's still Harvey, the sound engineer, to chaperone, I guess. So Lionel puts up a slide with some well-written words, but he puts it upside down, and Augusta has to control her bemusement as Frank cranes his head upside down to read the words that Lionel has written for him. So that is how that one ended, so I assume we'll pick up where that left off. This is a Friday episode, so that's one of the little cliffhangers. Now, with Lakin gone, it's up to Christy to entertain Ted when he comes over, and so they decide to go swimming. She suggests skinny dipping at one point, but he seems to have some trunks when they come back in. So
I think he borrows a pair of Warrens.
They talk about how old-fashioned Lakin is, and Christy strokes his beard and kisses him. And Ted says he's sorry if he gave her the impression that he was interested, and she says, "Oh, you're just not ready for me yet." And then Christy asks what they're waiting for, their 30th birthdays. Ted gets up to leave just as Lakin comes home, and he doesn't even stay so uncomfortable. So Christy tells Lakin they went for a swim and then says, "Is there anything wrong with that?" Entirely unbidden, but Lakin says no, but I'm sure that's put something in her head, maybe. And I didn't quite catch this bit, but there was a necklace on the table at the end, and Christy's the only one left in the living room at the end, and she picks up the necklace, so I don't know whose necklace that is, or where it came from, or what's... Yeah. Because I don't think Lakin sat down at that table at all. James, who is the bearded of the two henchmen, takes Polaroids of Kelly all tied up with a gag, and James and Chuck, who's the bald one, go to the Waits Motel to hide them. Cruz and Eden show up, and they visit the farmers at the farmhouse, but the farmers are suspicious that they might be fake cops as well, and so they actually cover for Nick and don't say that they've seen him. Cruz and Eden interface with the sheriff and his deputy Tim, who suggests that the Waits Motel is abandoned, but a possible place where they might be. So they search the room, and when they get to the 10th, I think, room, they find the stack of Polaroids, as well as a Nick. They find the stack of Polaroids, as well as a letter that says, "I have Kelly. If you want to see her alive again, I want $5 million. Nick Hartley." So Eden is, of course, immediately convinced by this. So it's dark, and Cruz calls into the sheriff that they're going to stay overnight at the Waits Motel. And it turns out that's the only room with a mattress. So Cruz and Eden share the last mattress. And then Cruz muses that if that fire had started a few minutes later, they'd be married now. And Eden says, "Nope, we'd be divorced now, because you still would have arrested my mother." Dr. Renfro, who's gone total psycho, total James Bond villain right now. He tells Kelly that she will be used as a guinea pig for one of his most brilliant inventions. Faux Jack Stanfield Lee arrives by helicopter, and he doesn't care anymore that Kelly can see him. He reveals to Kelly that he's Jack's older cousin, but she won't remember anything because they're going to wipe her memory with Renfro's Auto-Pnemonic Labic Retrograder. Chuck and James strap Kelly into the machine. She has a band around her head, and they turn on the machine, and Kelly screams. But Nick has arrived at the Strategic Air Command missile site, and he has sneaked in, and he bonks James on the head with a metal bar, and then grabs the gun from Chuck and threatens Renfro and Faux Jack, and says, "I'm going to shoot you unless someone turns that machine off." But Renfro says the machine can't be turned off once it's started. And before Nick can decide who to shoot, James regains consciousness and overpowers Nick, and then Chuck punches him out. Mm-hmm. So I think Kelly's memory is going to be wiped. They said they're going to wipe it all the way up to just before she saw Jack get on the elevator and light a cigarette. So
she did seem to kind of like come awake a little bit at one point, I thought, when she was in the machine. So I wonder if perhaps the process won't be quite as complete as they're hoping. I'm kind of imagining a scenario where she doesn't remember Nick, and of course is no help in providing him with any kind of alibi, and he becomes either a fugitive or ends up cooling his heels in jail, but maybe she at some point develops some flashbacks or something like that. So that's one thought I had.
Well, there's probably no clues for Cruz and Eden to find the silo, because they wouldn't have left any with the Polaroids. Maybe if they do eventually find the farmer and his wife again, they would be able to talk them into that, she really is Kelly's sister, and in that case they would probably say they're up at the silo. But for now, the other thing is that, Kelly's memory could be wiped more than just back up to the thing. She might be a total zombie, and then Nick might have to rescue her and be on the run with a zombie girl.
Yeah.
That might be more soapy.
Yeah, I mean, and as you say, if he does at some point team up with Brick, that would be quite interesting as well. I don't think Amy will be of any help as usual, but, because we do see her at one point. She catches Brick breaking into to faux Jack Stanfield Lee's office, and she's like, she doesn't really, she still doesn't want to see any bad in Jack. So.
And the interesting thing is, even though Kelly, won't remember that it's Jack's cousin. Nick will remember Jack Stanfield being there. I think Nick knows who he is, right?
Yeah, so that's another interesting point. Can they afford to leave Nick alive?
Mm-hmm. Nick was in the study, the Capwell study, and he had turned on the TV when Kelly said, "Oh, that's the guy I saw at the airport or whatever it was." So, and in the room. So so Nick definitely knows who Jack Stanfield is. So, yeah, I assume they're going to try to kill Nick as soon as. Well, maybe that's what causes Kelly to stay in the brain machine too long, and causes her memory to get overly wiped because Nick maybe is, fighting with all four of them, Chuck and James and Faux Jack and Dr. Renfro.
And if it gets, and then that's the other thing, if it gets too far wiped, then that's not really going to work necessarily so well for putting the blame on Nick. I mean, they still can, but it's going to look very suspicious if she can't remember anything after, her 12th birthday or something like that.
That's right. Nick's going to say, well, I didn't invent a brain machine.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that was a Friday cliffhanger. So, we will see what happens Monday. We haven't talked about people leaving the show for a while. There will be some regular characters leaving the show between now and the end of the year, so let's do 3 different predictions. One is regular character leaving. So who do you think the next regular character to leave the show would be?
Well, I'm going to guess Jade, just because we don't see her very often and we've already lost Danny and Marissa.
All right. And there will be a recast, or 7, by the end of the year. Who do you think will be next recast?
I'm going to guess Santana.
Santana? Oh, just had a new Santana.
Well, I remember a remark, I think it was, that Lane Davies made when we were on the cruise and talking about how there were so many Santanas at the beginning of the series. So whether they all came within the first year, I don't know, but that's a thought.
All right. And remember how Amy was sick and there was a 2-day temporary recast for Amy? I think there are at least 2 more temporary recasts by the end of the year, which, it's only June, but any guesses as to who the next one might be?
You mean because the person's been doing other
ill
projects
or something,
or ill?
I think probably illness is the ones I'm thinking, or I think there might be a unknown recast as well, unknown temporary recast, for unknown reason.
Well, I think that I think the one who plays Jack Stanfield Lee actually did become ill in real life at some point, but whether they did a temporary recast of him before they really discovered the extent of his illness, I don't know. But that would be, to me, a possibility. Temporary recast. I'm going to guess Christy.
So Christy, with Jack in the back of your mind?
Yeah, that might be someone who will leave the show too, although maybe not quite this early.
All right, we'll see. I'm not quite sure when the first of these events happens, but I think we get one over the summer at least. So we will see if you're right on any of these. And that is it for week 47 Santa Barbara. Next week is week 48, so I think we're heading into, one more week, and then we'll be in the final month of the year. And we're almost at 1 year, which is exciting. And I'm sure all of our fans are excited to find out what happens next.
The many, many bots who watch this.
The many Russian bots who watch our show. All right, we will see you in, I think it's every 2 weeks we're releasing now. So try to release this one on Tuesday, October 6th. So we'll see you again on the 14th, 20th of October. All right, see you then.
Bye-bye.
Hold on to your hat, Gussie. We're about to go off into the wild blue yonder.